What if the person you love the most is also the person teaching you the hardest lesson in philosophy, and you don't even realize it? Somewhere right now, in a quiet kitchen or a dim bedroom, two people who love each other are hurting each other without meaning to. Not because they are bad people. Not because the love isn't real. But because nobody ever taught them how to hold peace in their hands without crushing it. This is the story of that struggle, and the ancient answer to it that most people have never truly understood. 2,000 years ago, a man sat in a tent on the edge of a battlefield, writing letters to himself. He was not writing about war strategy or conquest. He was writing about his temper, his impatience, his tendency to snap at people he loved when he was tired or afraid. That man was a Roman emperor, one of the most powerful humans alive at the time, and yet in his private notebook, he wrote like a student still learning how to be calm. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and centuries later, his private journal became one of the most read philosophy books in human history. Not because he mastered armies. Because he tried, again and again, to master himself. This is the heart of Stoicism, and it is the heart of every peaceful relationship that has ever existed. Not the absence of conflict. Not perfect partners who never disagree. But two people who understand something most couples never learn. The peace of a relationship is not created by controlling the other person. It is created by mastering yourself. Today, we are going to walk through the Stoic rules that can transform how you love, how you argue, how you listen, and how you stay close to someone without losing yourself. These are not tips from a modern self-help book. These are ideas tested by emperors, slaves, and philosophers who lived through loss, betrayal, exile, and grief, and still found a way to remain steady. If you have ever felt your relationships slipping through your fingers because of small arguments that turn into big wounds, this is for you. Stay until the end, because there is a short story coming that will change how you see your next disagreement forever, and there is a reason so many people are subscribing to this channel after watching videos like this one. You will understand why very soon. Let's begin with the first rule, and it is the one that changes everything else. Rule 1: you cannot control your partner, only your response to them. The Stoics built their entire philosophy around one simple, brutal truth. There are things within your control, and there are things outside your control. Your thoughts, your judgments, your choices, your responses, these belong to you. Everything else, other people's opinions, their moods, their past wounds, their future decisions, these do not belong to you, no matter how much you love them. Most relationship pain comes from forgetting this distinction. You try to control how your partner feels. You try to control how they see you. You try to control the outcome of a conversation before it even starts. And when you cannot control these things, which you never could, you feel powerless, and that powerlessness turns into frustration, and frustration turns into blame. Imagine a woman named Elena, married for 11 years, who spent most nights waiting for her husband to say the right thing, to comfort her the exact way she imagined comfort should look. When he didn't, she felt abandoned, even though he was sitting right next to her. She was trying to control an outcome that was never hers to control, his internal world, his way of expressing love. The moment she stopped demanding he love her in her imagined way, and instead focused on how she chose to respond to his very real, very imperfect way of loving her, something shifted. She stopped waiting to be rescued from her own expectations. This is not about giving up on your partner or accepting mistreatment. It is about understanding where your power actually lives. You cannot force someone to understand you. You cannot force someone to change at your pace. You cannot force an apology to feel sincere if it isn't. But you can control whether you approach them with patience or contempt. You can control whether you listen to understand or listen to win. You can control whether your love today is generous or resentful. This single shift, from trying to control your partner to mastering your own response, is the foundation every other Stoic rule is built on. Without this, none of the rules ahead will work, because you will keep trying to fix your partner instead of building yourself into someone capable of real peace. And this, right here, is exactly why so many people who start watching videos like this one end up staying on this channel. Because once you understand this one shift, you start seeing your entire relationship differently, and you want more tools like this to keep building on it. That is not an accident. That is what happens when ancient wisdom finally makes sense in a modern kitchen argument. Rule 2, Amor fati, love the relationship you actually have, not the one you imagined. There is a Stoic phrase, amor fati, which means love of fate. It does not mean pretending everything is perfect. It means accepting reality so completely that you stop fighting what already exists, and instead work with what is actually in front of you. So many relationships die a slow death because one or both people are secretly grieving a fantasy version of their partner that never existed. They fell in love with potential, with who they imagined this person would become, and years later they are exhausted from resenting the real, flawed, unfinished human being who actually showed up. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself constantly about accepting what nature gives you, not what you wish nature had given you. Applied to love, this means accepting your partner's actual personality, their actual pace of growth, their actual way of showing affection, not the version you keep hoping will magically appear if you just wait long enough or complain enough. Consider a man named Daniel, who spent years frustrated that his wife wasn't more emotionally expressive. He wanted declarations, poetry, long conversations about feelings. She showed love by making his coffee exactly the way he liked it every single morning for a decade, by remembering small details, by staying close during hard times without saying much at all. He was so busy grieving the expressive partner he imagined he deserved that he almost missed the quiet, loyal partner standing in front of him the entire time. Amor fati in relationships does not mean tolerating cruelty, or accepting a partner who refuses to grow. It means releasing the exhausting habit of comparing your real relationship to an imagined one, and instead asking, what is actually good here, right now, in this imperfect, real connection? When you stop fighting reality, you free up an enormous amount of emotional energy you were spending on grief for something that never existed, energy you can now spend on nurturing what is actually alive in front of you. Rule 3. The dichotomy of control during arguments. Arguments are where relationships either grow stronger or slowly rot. And the Stoic approach to arguments is radically different from what most people practice. Most people argue to win. They argue to prove they were right, to make the other person admit fault, to release built-up frustration. The Stoics argued, when they had to, with a completely different goal, to understand and to remain virtuous, meaning to remain honest, fair, and calm, regardless of what the other person did. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most important Stoic teachers, taught that if someone insults you or provokes you, and you become angry, you have handed them control over your inner peace. Applied to a relationship, this means if your partner says something careless or hurtful, and you spiral into rage or despair, you have let their momentary words control your entire emotional state. This does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you are fine when you are hurt. It means pausing before reacting. It means asking yourself, in this argument, what is actually mine to control? My tone. My willingness to listen. My choice to stay in the room instead of storming out. My decision to speak honestly instead of using cruelty as a weapon. Think about a couple, Sarah and Michael, who used to have explosive fights over small things, whose turn it was to do dishes, a comment made in front of friends that felt embarrassing. These small fights became large because both partners were reacting instead of choosing. One evening, Sarah tried something different. Michael made a comment that stung, and instead of firing back, she paused, took a breath, and said, "I need a minute before I respond to that." That single pause, that refusal to let his words immediately control her next words, changed the entire trajectory of the argument. It became a conversation instead of a war. This is the dichotomy of control applied in real time. You cannot control what your partner says in the heat of the moment. You can control whether you respond with the same heat or with steadiness. And steadiness, practiced consistently, becomes the emotional backbone of a peaceful relationship. Rule 4. Memento mori. Remember this, love will not last forever. This next rule sounds heavy, but it is one of the most transformative ideas in all of Stoic philosophy. Memento mori means remember you will die. The Stoics used this reminder constantly, not to be morbid, but to sharpen their appreciation for the present moment. Applied to relationships, this means remembering that the person sleeping next to you tonight will not be there forever. Not because your relationship is doomed, but because all human life is temporary. One day, through death or circumstance, this specific version of your love story ends. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to wake you up. So many people treat their partner as a permanent fixture, someone who will always be there, so they stop paying attention. They stop saying thank you. They stop noticing the way their partner laughs, or the small sacrifices made every single day that go unspoken. There is a story about a Stoic-minded widow named Clara, who lost her husband suddenly after 32 years of marriage. In her grief, she said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. She said she used to get irritated by the sound of him clearing his throat every morning before coffee, and now she would give anything to hear that sound one more time. The very things that annoyed her had become the things she missed the most, because those small sounds meant he was still there. Memento mori in a relationship means treating your partner's presence as the gift it actually is, temporary, uncertain, precious. It means choosing not to waste your limited time together on grudges that do not matter, on silent treatments that stretch for days, on pride that refuses to say sorry first. This rule does not ask you to live in fear of loss. It asks you to live in gratitude for presence. When you remember that this love is not guaranteed to last forever, you naturally stop taking it for granted, and peace grows in the space where resentment used to live. Rule 5. Practice negative visualization to appreciate what you have. Closely tied to memento mori is a specific Stoic practice called negative visualization, premeditatio malorum. This means occasionally imagining loss, not to suffer in advance, but to appreciate what you currently have before it is gone. Seneca, one of the most practical Stoic writers, taught that we should sometimes imagine losing the things and people we love, not out of pessimism, but so that when we return to reality, we feel a rush of gratitude instead of taking our circumstances for granted. In relationships, this might look like occasionally imagining a single day without your partner's presence, no morning greeting, no shared meal, no familiar voice in the house. This exercise, done briefly and without obsession, can dissolve resentment almost instantly. It becomes hard to stay angry about a partner leaving dishes in the sink when you have just imagined a world where they are not there to leave dishes anywhere at all. There is a story of a man named Thomas, who nearly lost his wife to a serious illness. During the frightening weeks of her recovery, every small habit that used to irritate him, her tendency to leave lights on, her habit of interrupting his stories, suddenly seemed like the most precious details in the world. When she recovered, he made a private commitment to remember that feeling. Every time a small irritation surfaced, he would briefly picture the hospital room, and the irritation would dissolve into gratitude. You do not need a health scare to practice this. The Stoics believed you could train this appreciation deliberately, without needing tragedy to teach you the lesson the hard way. A few minutes of imagining loss, done occasionally and gently, can restore the gratitude that long-term relationships slowly lose without anyone noticing. Rule 6. Speak with virtue, not for victory. The Stoics valued 4 core virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Applied to how you speak to your partner, this becomes a powerful filter for every conversation, especially difficult ones. Before speaking in anger, ask yourself, is what I am about to say wise? Is it fair? Does it show courage, meaning honesty, rather than passive aggression? Does it show temperance, meaning restraint, rather than an emotional explosion? Most relationship damage does not come from disagreeing. It comes from how the disagreement is spoken. Cruel words said in 5 seconds of anger can take years to fully heal, if they heal at all. The Stoics were deeply aware of the power of speech, and Epictetus repeatedly warned that we are often ruled not by events, but by our own words and judgments about those events. Consider a couple, Priya and Raj, who had built a habit over the years of using sarcasm as a weapon during arguments. Priya would win the argument in the moment with a clever, cutting remark, but the cost was a slow erosion of trust. Raj began flinching before difficult conversations, expecting to be humiliated rather than heard. When Priya began applying this Stoic filter, pausing to ask whether her words were wise and fair before speaking, the entire emotional climate of their marriage began to shift. She stopped winning arguments and started winning trust. Speaking with virtue does not mean being passive or swallowing your needs. It means expressing your needs honestly, without cruelty, without manipulation, without using your partner's insecurities as ammunition. This is one of the hardest Stoic disciplines to practice consistently, because in the heat of an argument, cruelty often feels satisfying in the moment. But satisfaction in the moment is not the same as peace in the relationship. Rule 7. Your partner's opinion of you is not your identity. One of the most liberating Stoic teachings is this: other people's opinions of you do not define your worth. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events, and this includes the judgments other people make about us. In relationships, this becomes especially important during criticism. When your partner says something critical, whether fair or unfair, many people immediately absorb that criticism as a complete verdict on their entire character. One critical comment about being messy suddenly becomes evidence that you are a failure as a partner. One comment about being distracted becomes proof that you do not care. The Stoic approach separates the comment from your core identity. Your partner's criticism, even when valid, describes a behavior or a moment, not your entire worth as a human being. This distinction allows you to hear feedback without collapsing into shame, and it allows you to give feedback without your partner collapsing either, because you learn to speak about specific actions rather than sweeping character attacks. There is a story about a woman named Anya, whose husband once said during an argument that she never listens. In the old pattern, she would have internalized this as an identity. I am a bad listener, I am selfish, I am failing as a wife. Instead, she paused and separated the comment from her core self. She asked, what specific moment made him feel unheard? It turned out he was referring to one specific incident from that week, not a permanent character trait. By not collapsing into shame, she was able to actually address the real issue, rather than spiraling into defensive rage or wounded silence. This Stoic separation between action and identity protects both partners from the corrosive habit of turning every disagreement into a referendum on whether they are fundamentally good or bad people. It keeps arguments specific, solvable, and survivable. Rule 8. Practice the view from above during conflict. The Stoics had a mental exercise called the view from above, where you imagine looking down at your life from a great height, seeing your conflicts as small moments within an enormous, ancient universe. Marcus Aurelius used this exercise constantly to gain perspective on problems that felt enormous in the moment, but were actually small within the scope of a full life. Applied to relationships, this means, during a heated argument, briefly imagining your conflict from a wider perspective. Will this specific disagreement, about whose turn it was to take out the trash, about a comment made at dinner, matter in 5 years? Will it matter on your deathbed? Zooming out does not mean dismissing your feelings as unimportant. It means placing them in proportion. There is a story of two elderly partners, married for 50 years, who were once asked what the secret to their long marriage was. The husband said something simple. He said that decades ago, they made an agreement that no argument was allowed to last longer than the length of a single meal. If they were still upset by the time the plates were cleared, they had to say so directly, without cruelty, and try again. This habit, without them ever naming it, was a version of the view from above. They refused to let small daily friction expand into permanent resentment. This exercise is not about suppressing real problems. Serious issues, betrayal, dishonesty, ongoing disrespect, deserve full attention and full conversation, not dismissal. But the daily friction, the small irritations, the minor disagreements that make up most of relationship conflict, these often shrink dramatically once viewed from a wider perspective. The view from above is a tool for proportion, not for avoidance. Rule 9. Temperance, the discipline of not reacting immediately. Temperance, one of the 4 Stoic virtues, is essentially the discipline of restraint. In relationships, this often looks like the simple, difficult practice of not responding immediately when you feel triggered. Modern psychology has caught up with this ancient wisdom. When you feel emotionally flooded, your body enters a state where rational thought becomes nearly impossible, and anything said in that state is likely to cause damage that outlasts the argument itself. The Stoics understood this intuitively, long before modern science explained the biology behind it. Seneca wrote extensively about anger, calling it a temporary madness. He argued that the wise response to anger is delay, giving yourself time before acting on it, because anger that feels urgent and justified in the moment often looks foolish and exaggerated in hindsight. Consider James, a man who used to fire back instantly whenever his partner said something that stung. Instantly meant within seconds, before he had even processed what was said. Over time, he began practicing what he called the 10-breath rule, taking 10 full breaths before responding to anything that triggered a strong emotional reaction. In the beginning, it felt artificial and slow. Over months, it became natural, and his relationship transformed, because his partner no longer felt like she was walking through a minefield every time she raised a concern. Temperance is not suppression. It is not swallowing your feelings and pretending everything is fine. It is creating just enough space between stimulus and response that your reaction comes from your values instead of your wounds. This single practice, delaying your response during emotional flooding, is one of the most immediately useful tools in this entire philosophy, and it is worth practicing starting today. Rule 10. Justice, treating your partner's needs as equally important as your own. The Stoic virtue of justice extends beyond courtrooms and laws. It means giving each person their due, treating others fairly, considering their needs with the same seriousness you consider your own. In relationships, this virtue becomes incredibly practical. Many conflicts arise because one partner unconsciously treats their own needs as more urgent, more valid, more important than their partner's needs. Justice, as a daily practice, means actively checking this imbalance. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about our duty to the people around us, the idea that we exist in relationship to others, not in isolation, and that a life well lived requires honoring the humanity of everyone we interact with, especially those closest to us. There is a story about a couple, Fatima and Omar, who both worked demanding jobs. For years, Fatima assumed her exhaustion after work was more significant than Omar's, because her job involved more visible stress. Omar quietly resented this imbalance for years without saying anything, feeling that his own tiredness, his own need for rest and support, was treated as less important. When a counselor finally helped them name this pattern, Fatima was shocked. She had never consciously decided her needs mattered more, it had simply become an unconscious habit. Applying the virtue of justice meant actively practicing curiosity about Omar's internal experience with the same seriousness she gave her own. Justice in a relationship does not mean keeping score or demanding perfect 50-50 splits in every single interaction. It means a consistent, honest effort to see your partner's needs, exhaustion, fears, and hopes as equally real and equally worthy of consideration as your own. This single shift dissolves an enormous amount of quiet resentment that builds silently in relationships over years. Rule 11. Courage means honesty, even when silence feels safer. Courage, another core Stoic virtue, is often misunderstood as boldness in dramatic, dangerous situations. In relationships, courage usually looks much quieter. It looks like telling your partner the truth about how you feel, even when staying silent would be easier and less risky in the moment. Many relationships slowly deteriorate not because of dramatic betrayals, but because of years of small, unspoken resentments. One partner feels hurt by something, says nothing to avoid conflict, and the unspoken hurt does not disappear, it simply moves underground, resurfacing later as distance, sarcasm, or sudden explosive anger over something seemingly unrelated. The Stoics valued honesty as a form of courage because honesty often carries real risk. The risk of an uncomfortable conversation, the risk of your partner reacting badly, the risk of admitting your own role in a problem. Silence feels safer in the short term, but it accumulates a debt that eventually comes due, usually at the worst possible moment. There is a story about a woman named Grace, who spent 3 years quietly resentful that her husband never planned dates or surprises, while never once telling him this bothered her. She assumed he should simply know. The resentment built silently until one evening, over something small and unrelated, It exploded into a fight that seemed to come from nowhere, at least from his perspective. He had no idea this had been building for years, because she had never had the courage to name it directly, kindly, and early. Courage in a relationship means saying the uncomfortable thing while it is still small, rather than letting it grow silently until it becomes an eruption. It means telling your partner you felt hurt by something they said, rather than punishing them with silence and waiting for them to guess. This form of courage, quiet, consistent honesty, prevents far more damage than any dramatic gesture ever could. Rule 12. Wisdom means knowing which battles deserve your energy. Wisdom, the final core Stoic virtue, in the context of relationships, often looks like discernment, knowing which issues genuinely deserve a serious conversation and which ones are simply not worth the emotional cost of conflict. Not every difference between two people needs to become a battle. The Stoics taught that wisdom includes recognizing what truly matters versus what is simply an indifferent, meaning something that does not actually affect your character or your deeper values. A partner who squeezes the toothpaste tube differently than you prefer, a partner who takes a slightly different route home, these are indifferents. A partner who lies repeatedly, who disrespects your boundaries, who refuses to grow after being shown the same problem for years, these are not indifferents. These deserve serious attention. Wisdom in relationships means developing this discernment, learning to let go of the small stuff quickly, while addressing the significant stuff directly and without avoidance. Many couples get this backwards. They fight intensely over trivial preferences while avoiding the deeper conversations that actually determine the health of the relationship. Conversations about trust, about future plans, about unmet needs. There is a story of a couple, Lynn and David, who used to argue constantly about small domestic habits, how dishes were stacked, how laundry was folded, while never once having a real conversation about David's growing dissatisfaction with his career, or Lynn's quiet fear that they were drifting into separate lives. The small arguments were, in a strange way, easier, because they distracted from the larger, scarier conversation neither of them wanted to have. Once they began applying Stoic wisdom, letting go of the small preferences, and finally addressing the real underlying fear, their relationship became both calmer on the surface and deeper underneath. Wisdom is the virtue that ties all the others together. It tells you when to practice patience and when to speak up, when to let something go and when courage is required. Without wisdom, temperance can become passivity, and courage can become recklessness. Wisdom is the compass that keeps every other rule pointed in the right direction. Now, before we go further into the remaining rules, I want to tell you a story. Not a historical story this time, but one that captures everything we have talked about so far in a single, vivid moment. So pause here, get comfortable, because this next part is going to stay with you long after this video ends. The story of the lighthouse keeper and his wife. On a small, windswept island off a rocky coastline, there once lived a lighthouse keeper named Samuel and his wife, Odette. They had lived on that isolated island for 19 years, tending the light that guided ships safely past the dangerous rocks below. Their only company, most days, was each other, the wind, and the endless gray sea. Isolation like this either destroys a relationship or reveals its deepest foundations, and for Samuel and Odette, it revealed something extraordinary, though it took them years of hard, quiet lessons to get there. In their early years on the island, they fought constantly. Small irritations magnified in the isolation, the way Samuel hummed the same tune every morning while making coffee, the way Odette rearranged his tools without asking, the long silences that stretched during storms when the ferry couldn't come for weeks. With no distractions, no friends to visit, no separate lives to escape into, every unresolved tension between them had nowhere to hide. It surfaced, again and again, in the small enclosed space of the lighthouse keeper's cottage. One particular winter, a storm trapped them inside for 11 days straight. The wind screamed against the windows, the waves crashed violently below, and inside, an old argument resurfaced, an argument about a decision Samuel had made years earlier, moving to this remote island in the first place, a decision Odette had never fully forgiven him for, though she had never said so directly until that storm forced everything into the open. For the first 3 days of the storm, they barely spoke. Odette stared out at the churning gray water, replaying old resentments. Samuel busied himself with maintenance tasks that did not need doing, avoiding her eyes, avoiding the conversation neither of them wanted to have. The silence between them felt heavier than the storm outside. On the fourth day, something shifted. Samuel, watching Odette stare out at the sea with an expression of quiet grief he had never fully understood, finally sat down beside her. He did not defend his decision to move to the island. He did not explain himself, or justify the choice he had made all those years ago. Instead, he asked a simple question. He asked her what she had actually lost, in her own words, when they moved here. Odette was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, she began to speak, not about the island itself, but about her sister, who lived on the mainland, whom she had not seen in person in nearly 4 years because visits were so difficult from such a remote location. She spoke about missing her sister's children growing up, about missing ordinary things, birthday dinners, Sunday phone calls that turned into visits, small moments of connection she had quietly grieved for years without ever fully naming the grief, even to herself. Samuel listened. He did not interrupt to defend his choices. He did not immediately offer solutions or promises. He simply listened, fully, for nearly an hour, as Odette finally spoke the grief she had been carrying silently since the day they moved. When she finished, he said something that changed everything between them. He said he did not realize how much she had sacrificed silently, because she had never told him, and he had never asked. This moment, on the fourth day of an 11-day storm, contained nearly every Stoic principle we have discussed. Samuel practiced the dichotomy of control. He could not undo the decision that had already shaped their lives, but he could control how he responded to her pain in this moment. He practiced justice, finally treating her unspoken needs as equally important as his own long-held reasons for choosing this isolated life. He practiced courage, sitting with an uncomfortable truth instead of avoiding it through busywork. And Odette, in finally speaking her grief aloud after years of silence, practiced her own form of courage, the courage of honesty over the false safety of silent resentment. The storm continued for 7 more days after that conversation. But something between them had changed permanently. They began, in the years that followed, a new practice. Every few months, they would sit together and simply ask each other, "What have you been carrying silently that I do not know about?" Not as an accusation, not as a demand, but as an open, patient invitation. Samuel and Odette stayed on that island for another 16 years after that storm, until Samuel's health required them to finally move to the mainland. When asked, decades later, by their granddaughter, how they survived 19 years of isolation together without their marriage collapsing under the pressure, Odette said something simple. She said the isolation did not break them, because they eventually learned to stop hiding from each other inside it. The storm outside was frightening, she said, but the real danger had always been the silence they were keeping between themselves. This story captures something essential about Stoic peace in relationships. It is not built by avoiding storms, external or internal. It is built by two people who are willing to sit inside the storm together, ask honest questions, listen without defending, and choose response over reaction, again and again, for as many years as they are given. Now, let's continue with the remaining rules, because there is still so much more to uncover about how these ancient ideas apply to the very real, very modern challenges you are facing in your own relationship right now. Rule 13. Do not outsource your peace to your partner's behavior. One of the most common relationship traps is believing your peace depends entirely on your partner behaving a certain way. If they are calm, you are calm. If they are stressed, you become stressed. If they forget something important, your entire mood collapses. This is what the Stoics would call outsourcing your inner state to something outside your control. Epictetus taught that true freedom comes from realizing your peace of mind should not be hostage to external events, including the moods and behaviors of other people, even people you love deeply. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent to your partner's emotional state. It means developing an inner stability that does not completely collapse every time your partner has a bad day. Consider a woman named Beatrice, whose entire emotional state used to rise and fall based entirely on her husband's mood when he walked through the door after work. If he seemed tense, she spent the rest of the evening anxious, wondering what she had done wrong, walking on eggshells. Over time, she learned to separate his mood from her own inner state. She could notice he was stressed, offer support if he wanted it, and still maintain her own calm center, rather than absorbing his stress as her own. This Stoic discipline creates a healthier dynamic for both partners. When you stop outsourcing your peace to your partner's behavior, you become a stable presence they can lean on during their difficult moments, rather than another person who needs managing during their own hard days. Paradoxically, this stability often helps your partner regulate their emotions faster too, because they are not managing your anxiety on top of their own stress. Rule 14. Gratitude as a daily Stoic practice. The Stoics practiced gratitude not as a passive feeling but as an active daily discipline. Marcus Aurelius began many of his private reflections by naming things and people he was grateful for, specific teachers, specific qualities in his family members, specific lessons learned from difficult people in his life. In relationships, gratitude often fades not because love has disappeared, but because attention has shifted entirely toward what is wrong, unfinished chores, unmet expectations, old arguments, while the daily acts of care your partner performs simply blend into the background, unnoticed and unspoken. There is a story about a couple, Hassan and Noor, who began a simple nightly practice after nearly ending their marriage during a difficult year. Before falling asleep, each of them would name one specific thing, however small, that they appreciated about the other from that particular day. Not generic gratitude, but specific, that morning's cup of tea made exactly right, a patient response during a stressful phone call, a small joke that made them laugh during a hard afternoon. This practice, done consistently over months, rewired their attention. Instead of scanning for what their partner did wrong, they began unconsciously scanning for what their partner did right, simply because they knew they would need to name something specific each night. Gratitude, practiced as a discipline rather than waited for as a feeling, changes the entire emotional atmosphere of a relationship over time. Rule 15. Accept that your partner is also struggling with their own inner Stoic battle. Every person you love is fighting their own private war against their impulses, their fears, their old wounds, often invisible to you. The Stoics taught deep compassion for this shared human struggle, recognizing that every person is doing their imperfect best with the tools and wisdom they currently possess. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about approaching difficult people with understanding rather than immediate judgment, reminding himself that people who wrong us usually do so out of ignorance or inner struggle, not pure malice. Applied to a partner who snaps at you after a hard day, or forgets something important during a stressful season, this perspective transforms frustration into compassion. This does not excuse genuinely harmful behavior. Patterns of disrespect deserve honest conversation and real boundaries. But for the ordinary, everyday imperfections, the impatience after a bad day, the forgetfulness during overwhelming weeks, remembering that your partner is fighting their own invisible battles softens the instinct toward immediate blame. There is a story of a man named Victor, who used to feel deeply hurt every time his wife seemed distracted or distant during dinner. He assumed it meant she did not value their time together. Only after a particularly hard year, watching her struggle silently with anxiety she had never fully named to him, did he realize her distraction had never been about him at all. It had been about an internal battle she was fighting quietly, every single day, that he had simply never noticed. Understanding this transformed his frustration into patience, and eventually into a level of support that helped her finally speak openly about what she had been carrying. Rule 16. The Stoic Archery Lesson: Aim carefully, release completely. The Stoics used the metaphor of an archer to explain a crucial distinction. An archer aims with total focus, precision, and care, but once the arrow leaves the bow, the wind, the target's movement, all final outcomes are beyond the archer's control. The wise archer takes full responsibility for the aim, and then releases attachment to the outcome. Applied to relationships, this means bringing your full effort, honesty, and care into how you show up for your partner, and then releasing your grip on how they respond. You can aim with love, speak with kindness, listen with full attention, And still, sometimes, your partner will react in ways you did not hope for. That reaction, ultimately, is not fully within your control. This teaching liberates people from the exhausting habit of measuring their own worth by their partner's reaction in any given moment. You did your part with integrity, that is what was yours to control. Their response belongs to their own inner world, their own mood, their own unresolved history, much of which has nothing to do with you at all. There is a story of a woman named Edise, who spent months carefully planning a heartfelt anniversary surprise for her husband, only to have him respond with distraction and mild irritation, because he had received difficult news at work that same day, news he had not yet told her. In the old pattern, she would have taken his reaction personally, assuming her effort had failed or was unappreciated. Instead, she remembered the archery lesson. She had aimed with love and care, that part was complete and good, regardless of his temporary reaction, which belonged to circumstances entirely outside her control. Rule 17. Forgiveness as a rational Stoic choice, not just an emotional one. Modern culture often treats forgiveness as something that must be felt before it can be given, a warm emotional release that arrives on its own timeline. The Stoics approach forgiveness differently, as a rational decision, a choice made with the mind, that the emotions eventually follow. Seneca wrote extensively about the corrosive effect of holding on to anger, describing how anger held for too long harms the person holding it far more than the person it was originally aimed at. In relationships, unforgiven grudges accumulate like sediment, slowly clouding every future interaction with residue from the past. This does not mean forgiveness must be immediate, or that serious betrayals should be forgiven without genuine repair and changed behavior. It means recognizing that indefinitely holding on to old wounds, replaying them during unrelated arguments, using them as ammunition years later, ultimately poisons your own peace more than it punishes your partner. There is a story of a couple, Tabo and Lerato, who nearly ended their marriage after Tabo made a serious financial mistake that put their family's savings at risk. Lerato's initial anger was completely justified. But years later, she noticed she was still bringing up this single mistake during arguments about completely unrelated topics, using it as a permanent weapon whenever she felt hurt about anything else. She made a conscious, rational decision, separate from whether she still felt residual anger in any given moment, to stop using that old wound as ammunition. She chose forgiveness as a decision, and over time, the emotional release she had been waiting for finally followed her rational choice, rather than preceding it. Rule 18. The Daily Stoic Review, a nightly practice for lasting peace. The Stoics, particularly followers of Pythagorean and Stoic traditions, practiced a nightly self-review, asking themselves each evening, what did I do well today, what did I do poorly, and what could I improve tomorrow? This simple, humble practice, done consistently, built enormous self-awareness over time. Applied to relationships, a nightly review might sound like this, asking yourself honestly each evening, did I listen fully today, or was I distracted while my partner spoke to me? Did I speak with patience, or did I let irritation control my tone? Did I notice something good about my partner today, or did I only notice what irritated me? This practice requires humility, honestly acknowledging your own failures without collapsing into shame, and genuinely committing to improvement without empty promises that never translate into changed behavior. Over months and years, this small nightly practice builds enormous self-awareness, the exact self-awareness that prevents small relationship problems from calcifying into permanent patterns. There is a story of a man named Julian, who began this practice after a difficult period in his marriage where he realized he had become chronically impatient without ever consciously deciding to become that way. Each night, he would honestly ask himself these 3 questions. In the beginning, the answers were humbling. He realized he interrupted his wife constantly, dismissed her concerns as overreactions, and rarely offered comfort without immediately jumping to solutions she had not asked for. Over months of honest nightly review, followed by small daily adjustments, his entire pattern of engagement with his wife transformed, not through one dramatic conversation, but through the slow, consistent discipline of honest self-assessment, repeated every single night. Rule 19. Treat your relationship as a shared project in virtue, not a source of happiness. Perhaps the most radical Stoic idea applied to relationships is this: a healthy partnership should not be approached primarily as a source of happiness, but as a shared project in becoming better, wiser, more virtuous people together. This reframing changes everything about how conflict, sacrifice, and daily friction are understood. When you expect your relationship to primarily generate happiness, every difficult moment feels like a failure of the relationship itself. But when you understand your relationship as a shared context for mutual growth, difficult moments become opportunities rather than failures, chances to practice patience, honesty, courage, and wisdom together, with someone who is committed to growing alongside you. Marcus Aurelius understood his entire life, his marriage included, as training ground for virtue, not primarily as a pursuit of pleasant feelings. This does not mean joy and happiness are unimportant; they are wonderful byproducts of a relationship built on virtue. But when happiness becomes the primary goal, couples often make short-term choices that feel good immediately but erode long-term trust and respect. There is a story of a couple, Ingrid and Lars, who reframed their entire approach to marriage after nearly 20 years together. Instead of asking, "Are we happy right now?" a question that fluctuates daily based on mood and circumstance, they began asking, "Are we growing more patient, more honest, more courageous because of this relationship?" This single shift in framing helped them endure genuinely difficult seasons, career changes, health scares, the ordinary hardships of a long life together, without mistaking temporary unhappiness for evidence that the relationship itself was failing. This is exactly the kind of perspective shift that changes how people watch their entire relationship, and it is exactly why this channel exists, to keep bringing you these reframes that most people never encounter until it is almost too late. If this idea landed for you, subscribing means you will not miss the next one. Rule 20. Silence is not always peace. Learn to distinguish the two. Many couples mistake silence for peace. No arguing, no raised voices, no visible conflict, and they assume this means the relationship is healthy. But the Stoics were deeply concerned with internal states, not just external appearances, and true peace requires internal honesty, not merely the external absence of visible conflict. Silent resentment, unspoken disappointment, quiet withdrawal, these can create a relationship that looks peaceful from the outside while slowly dying on the inside. The Stoics valued honest confrontation with reality over comfortable illusion, even when that reality was uncomfortable to face directly. There is a story of a couple, Wei and Mei, who prided themselves for years on never fighting, showing this off to friends as evidence of a strong marriage. In reality, they had simply stopped bringing up anything difficult, each quietly accumulating grievances that never surfaced, because surfacing them felt riskier than simply staying quiet. Their marriage ended not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, sudden announcement from Wei that he had been unhappy for years and had already decided to leave, a reality Mei had never seen coming, because the silence had convinced her everything was fine. True Stoic peace requires the courage to occasionally disturb comfortable silence with honest conversation. It requires distinguishing between the peace that comes from genuine resolution and the false peace that comes from simple avoidance. Learning this distinction, and choosing honest discomfort over comfortable silence, is one of the more difficult but essential rules in this entire philosophy. Rule 21. Love as an act of will, not only a feeling. The Stoics understood love, in its highest form, not merely as an involuntary feeling that arrives and departs on its own schedule, but as a series of deliberate choices, an act of will practiced daily, especially during seasons when the feeling itself feels distant or faded. This does not mean forcing yourself to stay in a relationship that is genuinely harmful or has permanently lost mutual respect. It means understanding that in any long-term relationship, the feeling of romantic love naturally ebbs and flows, and during the ebbing seasons, choosing loving actions, patience, generosity, attention, can often help rekindle the feeling that seemed temporarily absent. There is a story of a couple, Rosa and Tomas, who went through a particularly difficult year where the romantic feeling between them seemed to have quietly evaporated, replaced by exhausted logistics, coordinating children, careers, and household responsibilities. Rather than waiting passively for the feeling to magically return, They made a conscious decision to practice loving actions deliberately, schedule time together, deliberate physical affection, intentional conversations about topics beyond logistics. Slowly, over months, the feeling that had seemed gone began to return, not because it arrived on its own, but because their consistent actions created the conditions for it to regrow. This Stoic understanding of love as partly an active will offers enormous hope during the inevitable difficult seasons every long relationship faces. It means you are not simply a passive passenger waiting for feelings to arrive or depart. You have real agency, through daily choices and actions, to nurture the conditions where love naturally flourishes again. Now let's move into a second story, one very different from the lighthouse keeper, because I want you to see how these same principles play out in an entirely different setting, a much faster, much more modern setting, one you might recognize far more easily from your own life. The story of the two phones on the kitchen table. Maya and Chitty had been together for 6 years, married for 2. They lived in a small apartment in a busy city, both working demanding jobs that kept them glued to their phones from morning until night. Their relationship had slowly, quietly, become dominated by screens, not through any single dramatic moment, but through thousands of small choices, checking a notification during dinner, scrolling social media in bed instead of talking, responding to work messages during what should have been their only shared free time. Neither of them noticed the erosion happening in real time. It simply became normal. Dinner became a silent event, both scrolling their separate phones at the same table, occasionally sharing a funny video they had found, but rarely engaging in real conversation. Weekends blurred into a haze of separate screens in the same physical space, together but not really together. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening, nothing dramatic, no betrayal, no argument. Maya looked up from her phone during dinner and, for just a moment, really looked at Chitty, illuminated by the blue glow of his own screen, completely absent despite sitting 3 feet away from her. She felt an overwhelming wave of loneliness, sitting right next to the person she loved most in the world. She did not yell. She did not accuse him of anything. She simply said quietly, "I miss you, even though you're right here." Chitty looked up, confused at first, then slowly understanding what she meant. He looked at his phone, then at her, then admitted something he had never said out loud before, that he had noticed the same distance growing between them but had not known how to name it, or how to stop it, because it had happened so gradually that no single moment felt like the right moment to address it. That night, they made a decision together, one dinner per week with no phones at all, placed in a drawer in another room, completely inaccessible. The first few dinners felt strange, almost uncomfortable. They realized how much they had been using their phones as a buffer against the vulnerability of real, undistracted conversation. But slowly, over weeks, these phone-free dinners became the most important part of their week, a space where they relearned how to actually see each other again. This story illustrates several Stoic principles working together. Maya practiced courage, naming an uncomfortable truth rather than letting the silent distance continue growing indefinitely. Chitty practiced honesty rather than defensiveness, admitting his own awareness of the problem rather than denying it or making excuses. Together, they practiced wisdom, recognizing that this particular issue, the growing distance caused by constant distraction, was not a small indifferent thing to be ignored, but a significant threat to the health of their relationship that deserved direct, deliberate action. They also practiced a form of memento mori, without ever naming it that way. Maya's moment of looking up and feeling loneliness beside her own husband was, in essence, a small glimpse of what losing genuine connection with him might feel like, even while he remained physically present. That glimpse of loss, however brief, was enough to motivate real change before the distance grew into something far harder to repair. Years later, Maya and Chitty still maintained their phone-free dinner tradition, now expanded to include weekend mornings as well. They often tell friends that this simple, deliberate choice, removing a small but constant source of distraction, saved their marriage from a slow, quiet death that neither of them would have noticed happening until it was nearly too late. Sometimes, they say, the biggest threats to a relationship are not dramatic betrayals or explosive arguments. Sometimes they are simply thousands of small moments of not truly seeing each other, accumulating silently until someone finally has the courage to look up and say something. This story is a reminder that Stoic wisdom is not only for ancient battlefields or historical philosophers. It is for ordinary Tuesday evenings, for two phones sitting on a kitchen table, for the quiet decision to look up and truly see the person sitting across from you. Rule 22. Respect your partner's autonomy as a separate rational being. The Stoics deeply respected the idea that every person is a separate rational agent, capable of their own choices, their own reasoning, their own path toward wisdom. Applied to relationships, this means respecting your partner as a whole, separate person, not an extension of yourself or a project to be managed and improved according to your own preferences. Many relationship conflicts stem from one partner unconsciously treating the other as something to be shaped, corrected, or optimized, rather than respected as an autonomous adult capable of making their own decisions, even decisions you personally disagree with. This does not mean withholding honest feedback or avoiding difficult conversations about genuine concerns. It means holding those conversations with respect for your partner's autonomy, rather than treating disagreement as a personal failure on their part that must be corrected. There is a story of a man named Klaus, who spent years subtly trying to reshape his wife's career choices, her friendships, even her hobbies, always with good intentions, believing he knew what would make her happiest. His wife, Ingrid, eventually confronted him about this pattern, explaining that even his well-intentioned suggestions had begun to feel like a slow erosion of her own autonomy, as though her own judgment about her own life was not fully trusted or respected. Klaus was initially defensive, believing his intentions excused the pattern. Over time, he came to understand that respecting her as a fully autonomous rational being meant offering his honest perspective when asked, but ultimately trusting her judgment about her own life, even when her choices differed from what he personally would have chosen. This Stoic respect for autonomy creates a relationship built on mutual trust rather than subtle control, a partnership between two whole people, rather than one person managing or improving another. Rule 23. The Stoic practice of role ethics, honoring your role as a partner. Stoic philosophy included a concept sometimes called role ethics, the idea that we each hold multiple roles in life: parent, child, citizen, friend, partner, and that living virtuously means honoring the specific duties and responsibilities that come with each role, without letting one role completely consume or distort the others. Applied to relationships, this means consciously honoring your specific role as a partner, showing up with the particular qualities that role requires: attentiveness, loyalty, honesty, support, distinct from your role as an employee, a friend, or a parent, even though these roles inevitably overlap and influence each other. There is a story of a woman named Priscilla, an extremely successful executive who brought her workplace leadership style directly into her marriage, treating conversations with her husband like business negotiations, always pushing for efficient solutions, always slightly managing the interaction toward a desired outcome. Her husband, Marcus, eventually pointed out that he did not want a business partner managing him toward efficient outcomes. He wanted a life partner who could simply be present with him, without an agenda, without constant problem-solving mode. Priscilla realized she had been unconsciously applying her professional roles habits to an entirely different role that required different qualities: presence rather than efficiency, emotional attunement rather than problem-solving. This Stoic awareness of distinct roles helps partners recognize when habits from one area of life, work, family of origin, friendships, are being inappropriately applied to the specific role of romantic partnership, which often requires different qualities entirely: patience over efficiency, presence over management, emotional attunement over solutions. Rule 24. Accepting impermanence without losing commitment. There is a delicate balance in Stoic philosophy between accepting the impermanence of all things, including relationships, while still maintaining full commitment and effort within that impermanence. This is not a contradiction, it is actually the source of tremendous freedom. Understanding that nothing lasts forever, that even the strongest relationships face inevitable challenges, changes, and eventually, separation through death, does not mean approaching your relationship with detachment or reduced effort. Paradoxically, it often increases commitment, because you understand this specific chapter of connection is precious precisely because it will not last in its current form forever. There is a story of a couple, Esperanza and Joaquin, who faced a terminal diagnosis together in their 60s, after nearly 40 years of marriage. Rather than collapsing into despair, they described those final months as somehow the most connected period of their entire marriage, precisely because the impermanence that had always been true, though usually unacknowledged, became impossible to ignore. Every conversation carried new weight. Every small daily routine, morning coffee, and evening walk, became consciously precious rather than automatically taken for granted. This does not mean you need a terminal diagnosis to access this depth of appreciation. The Stoics taught that this awareness of impermanence is available to everyone, at any moment, through deliberate reflection, not only through crisis. Choosing to remember, even in ordinary, healthy seasons of a relationship, that this specific chapter of connection will not last forever in its current form, can bring the same depth of appreciation and commitment that Esperanza and Joaquin found only when facing an unavoidable diagnosis. Rule 25. The Stoic Understanding of True Strength in Relationships. Finally, we arrive at perhaps the most important reframe of all, what true strength actually means within a relationship. Popular culture often confuses strength with dominance, winning arguments, never showing vulnerability, never needing anything from your partner. The Stoics understood strength completely differently, as the capacity to remain steady, honest, and virtuous, especially during moments when it would be easier to react, defend, or withdraw. True Stoic strength in a relationship looks like admitting when you are wrong without excessive self-punishment. It looks like staying present during your partner's pain instead of retreating into distraction. It looks like speaking an uncomfortable truth with kindness rather than avoiding it through comfortable silence. It looks like receiving your partner's vulnerability without judgment, creating a safe space for them to be fully honest with you. This reframe, from dominance to steadiness, from winning to remaining virtuous, changes the entire emotional texture of a relationship over time. Couples who embody this form of strength do not necessarily argue less than other couples, but their arguments carry far less lasting damage, because both partners are practicing steadiness rather than combat, understanding rather than defense, virtue rather than victory. This is ultimately what Stoic philosophy offers every relationship, not a promise of never facing conflict, loss, or hardship, but a set of tools, tested across thousands of years, by emperors and former slaves, by ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, to face that inevitable conflict, loss, and hardship with steadiness, honesty, and enduring commitment to becoming better people, together. Now, before we close, I want to speak directly to you, the person watching this right now, because there is something important I want you to understand about why this channel exists. Every single video on this channel is built around the same idea, that ancient wisdom, tested across thousands of years by people facing real suffering, real loss, real conflict, has practical, immediate value for the exact struggles you are facing right now, in your relationship, in your career, in your own mind. This is not abstract philosophy disconnected from daily life. This is philosophy built specifically to be lived, applied, tested, and practiced in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday argument about dishes, or a difficult conversation about money, or a quiet moment of loneliness sitting right next to someone you love. If any single idea in this video landed for you, if you found yourself nodding along, thinking of your own relationship, recognizing a pattern you have lived through yourself, that recognition is exactly why people choose to subscribe to this channel. Not because we ask you to. Because once you experience how genuinely useful these ancient ideas are, applied directly to modern struggles, you naturally want more of them, before the next difficult conversation, before the next quiet moment of distance, before the next storm, literal or emotional, that tests your own relationship. This channel exists to keep bringing you these frameworks, one video at a time, tested against real historical wisdom, illustrated through stories designed to make abstract philosophy feel immediate and applicable to your actual life. Subscribing means you will have these tools ready before you need them, rather than searching for answers in the middle of a crisis, when clear thinking becomes so much harder to access. Every person who has subscribed to this channel after watching a video like this one did so for the same simple reason: they recognize that understanding your own mind, your own reactions, your own capacity for patience and virtue, is the single most valuable skill you can develop for every relationship in your life, not just romantic partnerships, but friendships, family relationships, even your relationship with yourself. If you found value in even one of these 25 rules, consider what it might mean to have access to this kind of framework consistently, applied to different challenges, different historical figures, different modern stories, released regularly, building over time into a genuinely useful mental toolkit for navigating relationships with more peace, more wisdom, and more steadiness than you currently have. Subscribing is a small action, it costs nothing, it takes a single second, but it means you will be here for the next video, and the one after that, slowly building a deeper understanding of how ancient philosophy can transform very modern struggles. The lighthouse keeper and his wife needed 19 years of isolation to learn the lessons we have covered today in under an hour. Maya and Chidi needed a quiet moment of loneliness at their own kitchen table to recognize a pattern that had been building silently for months. You do not need to wait for your own storm, your own moment of sudden recognition, to start applying these principles. You can start today, in your very next conversation with the person you love. Rule 26. The Stoic practice of preparing for difficult people, even when that person is someone you love. Marcus Aurelius famously began one of his mornings by reminding himself that he would encounter difficult people that day, people who were ungrateful, unreasonable, or unkind, and that he should expect this rather than be shocked by it. This was not pessimism. It was preparation. He believed that expecting friction in advance allowed him to meet it with composure rather than surprise. Applied to relationships, this means occasionally reminding yourself, gently, without dread, that your partner will sometimes be tired, short-tempered, distracted, or simply having a difficult day that has nothing to do with you. This small mental preparation prevents the shock and personal offense that often turns an ordinary bad mood into a full-blown argument. When you expect that your partner, like every human being, will occasionally show up as less than their best self, you are far less likely to take that moment personally. There is a story of a woman named Farida, who used to feel deeply wounded every single time her husband came home irritable after a hard shift at the hospital where he worked as a nurse. She took his exhaustion personally, assuming his short temper meant something about their relationship. After learning this Stoic practice, she began each evening, before he arrived home, quietly reminding herself that he might walk through the door depleted, and that this depletion was about his day, not about her. This small shift in expectation meant that when he did come home tired and short-spoken, she met it with calm patience instead of hurt confusion, which in turn helped him decompress far more quickly than her previous anxious questioning ever had. This practice is not about assuming the worst about your partner constantly. It is about removing the element of shock from ordinary human difficulty, so that when it arrives, as it inevitably will in any long relationship, you are prepared to meet it with steadiness rather than personal offense. Rule 27. Separating the person from the moment. One of the subtler Stoic teachings involves separating a single difficult moment from your overall judgment of a person's character. Epictetus taught that events themselves are neutral, it is our judgment about them that creates suffering. In relationships, this means a single argument, a single moment of insensitivity, a single failure to show up the way you needed, does not define who your partner is as a whole person. Many relationships suffer because partners keep a mental scoreboard, where every mistake becomes permanent evidence in an ongoing case against the other person's character. The Stoics would call this a distortion, mistaking a temporary event for a permanent truth. Your partner forgetting an important date does not mean they do not love you. It means, in that specific moment, they forgot, likely due to stress, distraction, or simple human fallibility. There is a story of a man named Oscar, who nearly ended a promising relationship early on because his partner, Freya, missed an important dinner due to a genuine scheduling mistake. In the moment, Oscar's mind raced toward sweeping conclusions: she doesn't prioritize me, this relationship isn't important to her, this is how it will always be. A mentor later helped him see that he had taken one moment and turned it into a permanent verdict, without any real evidence beyond that single mistake. When he separated the moment from the person, he was able to have an honest conversation about how the missed dinner made him feel, without destroying the relationship over a single, correctable error. This separation between a moment and a person's entire character is one of the most protective habits you can build in a long-term relationship, because without it, every mistake becomes ammunition for an ongoing, unfair trial that no relationship can survive indefinitely. Rule 28. The discipline of desire, wanting what you already have. The Stoics distinguished between the discipline of desire, learning to want the right things in the right measure, and constantly reaching outward for more than what is actually needed. Applied to relationships, this often shows up as comparison, comparing your partner to other people's partners, comparing your relationship to curated images on social media, constantly desiring a version of love that looks different from the one actually in front of you. This endless comparison creates a subtle but corrosive dissatisfaction, a sense that whatever you currently have is somehow not enough, regardless of its actual quality. The Stoic discipline of desire teaches you to examine whether your dissatisfaction comes from a genuine, unmet need, or simply from comparison to an artificial standard that was never realistic in the first place. There is a story of a woman named Camille, who spent months feeling quietly dissatisfied with her marriage after scrolling through social media accounts of couples who seemed to be constantly traveling, constantly celebrating elaborate anniversaries, constantly performing an idealized version of romance. She began to feel her own marriage, stable, quiet, comfortable, was somehow lacking. When she finally examined this feeling honestly, she realized her dissatisfaction had nothing to do with any genuine unmet need in her actual relationship. It was manufactured entirely by comparison to curated images that represented only a tiny, selectively chosen slice of other people's lives. Once she recognized this, she redirected her attention toward appreciating the specific, real qualities of her own marriage, rather than measuring it against a fictional standard built from other people's highlight reels. Practicing this discipline of desire, wanting what you already have rather than constantly comparing it to external standards, protects your relationship from a very modern and very corrosive form of dissatisfaction that previous generations rarely had to navigate at this scale. Rule 29. The Stoic view on apologies, sincerity over performance. The Stoics valued sincerity above performance in every area of life, including in the act of apologizing. A Stoic apology is not primarily about saying the right words in the right order to end an argument quickly. It is about genuine recognition of harm caused, followed by a real intention to adjust behavior going forward. Many couples develop a habit of performative apologies, saying sorry quickly just to end the discomfort of conflict, without any real internal recognition of what went wrong or any genuine intention to change the underlying pattern. This creates a frustrating cycle where the same apology gets repeated for the same behavior, over and over, without any actual repair happening beneath the surface. There is a story of a man named Benedict, who had developed a habit of quick, almost automatic apologies whenever his partner expressed hurt, saying sorry within seconds, before he had even fully understood what had upset her. His partner, Ilsa, eventually pointed out that his rapid apologies felt hollow, because they arrived so quickly that they could not possibly reflect real understanding of what he had done. She asked him, instead, to pause before apologizing, to actually sit with what had happened, and to offer an apology only once he genuinely understood the impact of his actions. This small shift, slowing down the apology process to ensure real understanding preceded it, transformed his apologies from empty rituals into genuine moments of repair. A sincere Stoic apology includes 3 elements: honest acknowledgement of the specific action that caused harm, genuine understanding of its impact on your partner, and a real intention to adjust behavior moving forward. Without all 3 elements, an apology becomes simply a performance designed to end discomfort quickly, rather than a genuine act of repair. Rule 30. Building an inner citadel together. The Stoics often spoke of building an inner citadel, an internal fortress of calm and reason that external events cannot fully penetrate. In a relationship, this concept can be extended beautifully: 2 partners building a shared inner citadel together, a joint sense of stability that neither external stress nor internal disagreement can fully shake. This shared citadel is built slowly, through every one of the practices we have discussed today, through honest communication, through choosing response over reaction, through gratitude, through forgiveness practiced as a rational choice, through remembering impermanence, through treating the relationship as a shared project in virtue rather than merely a source of fluctuating happiness. There is a story of a couple, Andres and Sophia, who weathered a genuinely catastrophic year together, a business failure, a serious health scare, the loss of a parent, all within 18 months. Friends often ask them how their marriage not only survived this year but seemed to grow stronger through it. Sophia's answer was simple. She said they had spent years, quietly and without any dramatic announcement, building what she called their shared calm place, a way of relating to each other built on the very practices we have walked through today. When the external world became chaotic, that internal shared stability, built slowly over years of small daily choices, held steady, giving them a foundation solid enough to weather nearly anything life brought their way. This is ultimately the deepest promise of Stoic philosophy applied to relationships. Not the absence of hardship. Life will bring hardship regardless of how wise or virtuous you become. But the presence of an inner citadel, built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, conversation by conversation, that remains standing steady, no matter how fiercely the external storms rage against it. If everything we have walked through today has resonated with you, if you recognize your own relationship somewhere inside these 25, now 30 rules, I want to invite you clearly and directly to subscribe to this channel. Here is exactly why that single action matters so much, beyond the usual polite request you hear at the end of every video. First, subscribing means these frameworks arrive in your life before your next crisis, not during it. Wisdom absorbed calmly in advance becomes instinctive during moments of real pressure. Wisdom searched for frantically in the middle of a painful argument rarely lands the same way. Second, this channel is building something cumulative, not a random collection of unrelated tips, but a genuine, evolving toolkit drawn from Stoic philosophy, illustrated through real stories, designed specifically to be applied to modern relationships, modern stress, and modern struggles. Each new video builds on ideas like the ones you just learned today: dichotomy of control, amor fati, memento mori, the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, applied to new situations, new stories, new challenges you have not yet faced but likely will. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the simple act of subscribing signals something to you about your own commitment to growth. It is a small, concrete decision that says, I am someone actively working to become wiser, calmer, and more skilled at loving another person well. That identity, reinforced through consistent small choices like this one, shapes how you show up in your actual relationship far more than any single video ever could on its own. This channel will keep bringing you these ideas, ancient wisdom, tested across centuries, applied directly to the exact struggles you are navigating in your own life right now, your own relationship, your own mind, your own daily choices between reaction and response, between silence and honesty, between comfort and growth. Before we close, I want to leave you with one final thought, something worth carrying into your next conversation with your partner, whether that conversation happens tonight, tomorrow morning, or sometime later this week. None of the rules we have covered today, the dichotomy of control, amor fati, memento mori, the four virtues, the practice of the view from above, the discipline of desire, the building of an inner citadel, none of them require you to become a different person overnight. They require small, repeated choices, made consistently, over ordinary days that rarely feel significant in the moment but accumulate into something profound over months and years. Marcus Aurelius did not become steady overnight. He wrote to himself daily, for years, working through the same struggles most of us face: impatience, irritation, the temptation toward pride, the difficulty of remaining calm around people who frustrate us. His journal was not a finished philosophy delivered from a place of already achieved peace. It was a working document, written by someone still practicing, still failing sometimes, still returning to these ideas again and again because the practice itself was the point, not some final destination where the work was finally done. This is good news for you, because it means you do not need to master every rule we have discussed today before you see real change in your relationship. Choose one. Perhaps the dichotomy of control, remembering that you cannot force your partner's mood or reaction, only your own response. Practice that single idea consistently for the next month, in every small disagreement, every moment of frustration. Notice what shifts. Then, when that practice feels more natural, choose another rule to layer on top of it. This is how Stoic philosophy was always meant to be lived, not as an overwhelming list to master all at once, but as a gradual, patient accumulation of small, steady choices. Relationships are not solved once and then finished. They are practiced daily, for as long as two people choose to remain committed to walking through life together. Some days that practice will feel effortless, full of warmth and easy laughter. Other days it will feel like real work, like choosing patience when irritation would be easier, like choosing honesty when silence would be more comfortable, like choosing presence when distraction would be simpler. Both kinds of days belong to a real, healthy relationship. Neither kind should be mistaken for failure. If you found yourself recognizing your own relationship somewhere in these stories today, in Samuel and Odette's storm, in Maya and Chitty's quiet kitchen table, in any of the smaller stories woven through each rule, that recognition is worth paying attention to. It usually means there is a specific, practical next step waiting for you, a conversation you have been avoiding, a small resentment you have been silently carrying, a moment of gratitude you have been forgetting to express. Consider what that next step might be for you, specifically, and consider taking it soon, while it is still small enough to address gently, before it has the chance to grow the way unspoken things tend to grow in the quiet spaces between two people who love each other. Thank you for spending this time with these ideas today. I hope something in this video changes how you approach your next disagreement, your next quiet evening together, your next opportunity to choose steadiness over reaction, virtue over victory, presence over distraction. If you want more of this, more ancient wisdom applied directly to modern relationships, modern struggles, and modern peace, subscribe now, so you never miss the next set of tools that could change how you love, how you argue, and how you build a lasting, peaceful partnership with the person you have chosen to walk through life beside. Please subscribe for more.